Good morning, everyone. Sorry about that small technical hitch. I can assure you I was clicking on the microphone sign. It just continued to be red. But anyway, thank you for joining the webinar this morning. My name's Nick Butler. I'm the Managing Director of JC Payroll Services, the dedicated payroll bureau for James Cooper, and I'm a partner at James Cooper Preston also. Today's seminar is really going to look at the coronavirus job retention scheme, the update from the 1st of July, or the update, should I say. The revenue are referring to this as phase 2. The screens are reasonably busy, but that's because there's quite a lot involved. And actually, to be fair, although the Chancellor announced a lot of this on the 29th, a lot of the details only just starting to trickle through. So I think we're going to learn some more as the weeks go on. But what I'm going to do today is have a look at the summary of the changes that have been announced. We're going to look at which employees and employers are included. I'll also look at how we work out flexible furlough pay and basic pay. We'll then take a look at an example on the great one. The examples speak 1,000 words. We'll look at salary sacrifice. It's very important to do so, I think. Salary sacrifice to begin with, was the unthought of part of furlough and what we all had to go through to get the pay right. So I'll touch on that. Then we'll look at how and what can be claimed back. And then I'll finish off with just a recap of future changes. So what is changing? Well, on the 29th of May, the Chancellor announced changes to the scheme, which essentially were aimed at making it easier for employers to bring staff back to work. The changes starting in July with the introduction of flexible furlough. That will be a large part of today's webinar, and that will be what I really look at with the example. A couple of key changes though. The period of furlough from the 1st of July can be anything from as little as 1 day. Prior to that, it had to be a minimum period of 3 weeks. Although it is fair to say that if you have started a period of furlough already, it must concurrently run through for 3 weeks, even if that's at the end or past the 1st of July. For July, the grant level will remain unchanged at the lesser of 80% pay or 2,500 cap, plus the associated employer on costs, which is employers NIC and the minimum employer AE pension costs. One thing that I must stress is that flexible furlough, which is something that is on everyone's lips, is optional. You do not need to use it. You're not compelled to use it. If you wish, or if the business is not in a position to either fund or bring the employee back, then you keep them on what I refer to as full furlough. So there is no requirement to bring the employee back to work and go on to flexible furlough if it's not right for the business. And the final point for July, and it's relevant because as we go through this, you'll see that the scheme is changing every month through to when it ends in October, is that claim periods can no longer straddle the start and the end of a month. Effectively, we don't see this as a problem. Most of the claims that we've done, most of the payrolls that we process are monthly, therefore the claims have generally been from the start to the end of the month. So I don't think that's going to cause too many problems. But it's worth considering if you have a pay period you're claiming and it will straddle 2 months, you have to make 2 claims, one for the June, for example, one for July, vice versa. In August, the scheme will continue to pay 80% of wages up to the cap of 2,500, but it will no longer cover the employer's on costs. So the employer's NIC or the minimum employer's auto-enrollment pension cost. And that is from August onwards. So that's where the scheme turns just purely to reimbursing the wage cost as opposed to on cost. There's also an introduction of the maximum limit of the number of employees that can be included in a claim, and that will be equal to the largest number included in a single claim prior to the 1st of July. And again, all of my slides will say this each month going forward. Flexible furlough is an option if the business is not in a position to do so. You can keep your staff on full furlough. September sees another key change in that the grant that is claimable will reduce to 70% of wages, subject to revised cap, which is reducing to £2,187.50, and the employer paying the remaining 10%. So the employee remains or at least receives 80% of normal, subject to the original cap. I won't bore you, well I will. Flexible furlough is an option, and if you need to, you keep people on full furlough. I'm repeatedly saying this is something that's come through a lot to me in the last week, is that people that are worried that the government are saying you have to bring people back to work and you cannot claim the scheme unless you do so. That is not true. There is no plans to do so. You can keep people on full furlough. And in October, the last month of the scheme, the grant will cover 60% of wages. The revised or down cap, therefore, is 1,875, and the employer will be responsible for making up the remaining 20% to the original 80. So, which employers can claim? Not a lot has changed here, to be fair. You still have to be a UK employer. You must have registered a PAYE scheme. It must have been in place before the 28th of February 2020. In fact, the date 28th of February is very important. It's when you base nearly all of your reference pays on. Nothing's changing because the scheme's changing from the 1st of July. You still base your furlough pay or your normal pay on the earnings on the 28th of February. The 19th of March was a date that revenue introduced, which caused a lot of confusion. But essentially, the pay that you base it on is the 28th of February for salaries, and we'll come to the calculation for variable pay later. But also, the business must have a UK bank account, and it must be enrolled for PAYE online. So there's no change to which employers can claim. Essentially, I think it's quite logical to say, effectively, as long as an employee who has already been or will have been furloughed for at least 3 consecutive weeks by the 30th of June, even if they're back to work, will be allowed to be furloughed from the 1st or after the 1st of July. This is why the Chancellor Rizzi made the announcement on the 29th. He said that if an employee had not yet been placed onto furlough, the latest date that they had to go on furlough was the 10th of June. This was so that 3 weeks consecutive furlough had been achieved by the end of June, so that come the 1st of July, that employee would be allowed to be included in future claims. Therefore, if you have people that have not been furloughed now, for example, never have been, they will no longer be eligible to join the scheme after the 1st of July. And it also needs to be said that if you have started a period of furlough, let's say now, let's say you did it from the coming Monday, that has to run for 3 consecutive weeks. The 3 consecutive week rule is being removed on the 1st of July. So if you start a period of furlough from now, it needs to run for 3 consecutive weeks, even if that ends after the 1st of July when flexible furlough is introduced. The only people that are exempt from having to get or have 3 weeks period by the end of June are parents that are returning from parental leave, because they could not, whilst on parental leave, have been placed on furlough during the period March to June. So essentially, anyone that you've furloughed to date and returning parents can be furloughed. Brief legal mention. I did this in my first webinar on the original scheme, and it should just be pointed out again, the inclusion in the scheme and the furlough arrangements do not remove the legal liability for employees or employers, and the normal employment equality discrimination laws will all apply in the usual way. The addition to this screen from anyone that attended my last webinar is that this time the revenue have confirmed that the grants cannot be used to substitute redundancy payments. So you would need to fund that outside of the scheme grant. Before I move on to furlough or flexible furlough, it's worth saying what has not changed. There's a lot of talk about the 80% reducing to 60, and of course that will be by October. But there are some things that will not change. I've mentioned one, which is that pay for salaried staff, or the amount of furlough pay for a month, the amount you based it on has not changed. It's still based on earnings or pay at the 28th of February. And again, for people who are not paid salary and their pay varies, they still use the 12-month average of the same period last year, or the full average for the last tax year. And again, I put on there that flexible furlough is not a requirement, it's an option. You can continue to use full furlough if required. So how do you work out flexible furlough pay? The main difference is that it works now from pay and claim periods, and then it uses hours to obtain the available grant. So the weeks are irrelevant now, it's all to do with hours. So let's assume we're paying for July and we process a monthly payroll. The pay and the claim are the same. So the formula is quite straightforward. If we look at this for a full or a part-time salaried staff, it's easier to illustrate. But if you were variable, once you've worked out your average hours, you would substitute usual hours with standard hours. So standard hours, we know it's whatever you're contracted to work per week. That could be 37, 35, 40 hours. You divide that by the number of days in the week. You do it by the week because most contracts will say what you're contracted to work in a week. So your pay pattern is a week. You then multiply that by the number of days in a month, and in July that's 31. And that equals your usual hours work. Now, this is all included in an example in a moment, but this is just the words to support the formula. So you take from that usual hours worked figure the number of hours that you've worked, and then whatever is left is the amount of furlough hours to be paid. And what you do to convert the number of hours then is you take the usual monthly furlough pay, and that's the one that we've all been using to furlough people, or work how we work that out, divided by the usual hours work that we just worked out, and multiply it by the furlough hours. So hopefully that's straightforward enough. You do exactly the same thing for variable of hours, as I said, but you work out the average of usual hours worked first. When working out basic pay, you must work it out on 100% of base pay, or 100% of what it was. You do not work that out on the base pay from February, it's whatever it is now. So let's look at an example. So Joanna Bloggs has worked at ABC Limited since 2016. She's working 40 hours a week for a salary of £3,000 a month. She's been asked to return to work from the 1st of July, working half days. So let's break down. Step one is work out the usual hours. So we know she's on 40 hours a week, and we know the pay pattern is a week. So it's 40 divided by 7. We know that July has 31 calendar days, so you multiply it by 31. She was 177.14. Revenue have confirmed that we always round up, and therefore it's 178. So the first part of our equation is 178 usual hours worked. Step two, work out the actual hours worked, and then whatever the resulting furlough hours we will get. So if we're working half days, July has 23 working days. A half day for Joanna is 4 hours because she's contracted to do 40 hours or 8 hours a day. So the worked hours for July will be 92 hours. So the furlough hours, if you take one from the other, will be £86, and that is 86 hours, and that's the amount in hours. Step three is then converting that to a financial amount. Well, if we look at what we've always been doing for Joanna, she was paid in line with her contract, £3,000 in February. But of course, the furlough rate is 80% of that, so it's 2,400. So we take the 2,400, we divide it by the usual hours we worked out, 178, and we multiply it by the furlough hours to be paid of 86. So the furlough pay to put through the payroll and to claim is £1,159.55. The payroll, you would just add the basic pay, which will be half normal. She's normally 3,000, so it'd be 1,500. And the gross pay, therefore, will be 2,659.55, and that's subject to all the usual deductions. So that's nice and simple. However, and this screen is quite important, is that the Chancellor did not intend to introduce flexible furlough until August. And by then, you will remember that the grant would no longer include employers' NI or employers' pension contribution costs. But due to pressure from employer groups and the CBI, for example, he decided to bring it in a month early. But it does somewhat change the way that we have to look at the calculation of what can be recovered as part of the grant. And that's if someone's being done by flexible furlough. If someone is remaining on full furlough, the calculation of tax and NIC, NIC and pension is the same. There's a slight tweak for those on flexible furlough, which I shall run through now. So the national insurance, the first thing we need to do is apportion secondary NIC threshold. Now, for the non-technical, a secondary NIC is essentially employer's NIC. It's a monthly payroll, so the threshold is 732. We divide it by the number of days in the period, 31. We multiply by the number of days in the claim period. Now, because we're paying and our claim period is the same, it's a month, it's very simple here. We then move straight on to you divide that by the usual hours worked, which we're now getting used to, and multiply that by the furlough hours claimed. That brings us, so the apportioned threshold for NIC is 353.66. Now we take the furlough pay of 1159.55, we deduct the threshold that's been apportioned, and then what's the resulting figure we multiply by 13.8%, which is the employer NIC rate, to give us the amount of NIC that we can be claimed under the grant. We effectively do the same calculation for the pension, and the lower level of qualifying earnings, or as also known as the national insurance lower earnings level, that starts out at £520 a month. We do exactly the same calculation, and I won't go through that, but you can see that the upshot is that the pension that can be recovered there is £27.25. The reason why, of course, is that if you're using flexible furlough, a portion of the NIC and the pension costs that will come out in the payroll, because furlough pay and basic pay is both taxable, nickable and pensionable, but part of those costs will belong to basic pay. So when you need to come to make the claim, it will be the total of the furlough pay and the two portions we just worked out that are available for the employer's NIC and the employer pension. And for Joanna's case, that'll be £1,298.01. You will also, to make the claim now, need to record the usual hours in the period and the actual hours worked with the furlough hours claimed. As mentioned earlier, I'd like to mention salary sacrifice. Salary sacrifice, essentially the rules have always been that as the furlough pay is a statutory benefit, you are not allowed to deduct a salary sacrifice arrangement from it. It's an illegal deduction. You're not allowed to. And therefore, we changed the way that the furlough pay was generated by effectively taking the pension off of gross pay before working out what the 80% was. That still remains for anybody that is full furloughed. What I would say is that if you're using flexible furlough and the amount of basic pay will be sufficient to cover any salary sacrifice deduction, then it's sufficient. You can revert to the normal salary sacrifice arrangements. That's important to someone on the payroll, because it is quite a faff, should we say, to suspend the salary sacrifice and work it out a different way. If the deductions are more than covered by the amount of pay, basic pay being paid, there's no reason why you can't go back to deducting the salary sacrifice arrangements as before. The claim process hasn't changed a great deal. The portal is still there for HMRC. If anyone's used it, it's quite a user-friendly fellow. A couple of things that are not on the slide to mention. The two big changes are you need to put in the hours that make sense for your claim, so the total hours and the furlough hours. But the other thing is that if you've made errors in previous claim submissions, you can now correct them. At the end of your submission, there is a question that says, do you need to correct a previous mistake? Unfortunately, it's very easy to reduce it by one that you overclaimed. If you're underclaimed previous, you still have to ring the revenue and try and get the additional benefit or claim through that way. And also, if you're in a position where you've made an error on a claim and you're not going to put in another claim because your people have returned to work, you need to ring the revenue in any case. But the actual claim process itself has changed little. So just a very quick recap. I'm more of a visual person, so I quite like this table. This just sets out the changes that I went through at the beginning, but in a more concise way, I think. If we look at down the first column, you've got the government contribution to employer pension and employer NIC, plus the government contribution to pay. Then you've got the employer contributions to those two elements. And then at the bottom line, reflect what the employee receives. So you can see there's no change in July. It's business as usual as far as the nuts and bolts are concerned. In August, there's no change to the value, but the employer then has to take up the cost of the pension and employer's NIC, and that runs through to the end of the scheme. Then we get to the bigger changes, I guess you could call them. In September, the government contribution to pay reduces to 70% with the employer contribution up to 10, and in October, the government contribution down to 60 with the employers up to 20, and you will see that the employee receives the 80% up to the original cap throughout. So I think that's quite concise. That's the slides I had today. I was mindful from the last webinar that we had, we didn't leave enough time for questions. So hopefully I've done that this time. Lizzie, I believe that you may have some questions for me.
Hi Nick, yes, we have had a few through. So taking it from the top, the first question is, if we have previously furloughed, say 5 staff, is that the number therefore capped? So would it be feasible to flexible furlough 5 people for 2 days, but not 10 employees for 1 day?
Effectively, that is what the legislation is saying, yes. I think that would be one of the first things to be challenged. If you've furloughed or rotated furlough, you may well have only done 5 people a month. You may well have used 10 or 15 people to do that. So how the legislation is now, that's how I interpret it as well. There will be challenges, and always in the first week, and we're not even at July yet. I'm sure that there will be challenges. But I would interpret it as exactly the same way, that yes, you can only include 5 people. But it should be also pointed out that the claim itself asks for the people's IDs, so you could effectively tweak the figure. And the reason why someone in my position might say you could do that is that you have to fully support the documentation anyway. The portal has very very simple portal with limitations. But no, the direct answer to that question is, yeah, my interpretation is you would be capped to 5 or limited to 5.
Great, thank you, Nick. The next question is, so if we have people we can bring back to do some work, but not regular, we can bring back for 3 days and then furlough again for the rest of the month or 2 weeks, and then work 3 days and then furlough again. So there's no general pattern needed. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, some people might say you work a day a week. Other people might say, well, let's start you off with, 2 days this week and we'll see how we go. And it may only be you're furloughed for two days in an entire month. But yes, that's correct.
Great, thank you, Nick. The next question is, will James Cooper Creston produce a spreadsheet for flexible furlough like the one provided previously?
Yes, we will. My finest Excel spreadsheet writer has written it and reviewing it on Monday. We will release it via our website for use. Well, it will be in time for January, but we just, because it's there are some meaty adjustments to the national insurance and pension contribution calculations. We just need to make sure it's right. The irony there is that it's only going to have the the NI and pension in for 1 month. But yes, the spreadsheet is coming.
We just had a follow up on that. You mentioned in time for January. I presume you meant July on that one. Is that correct?
I did mean July, yes.
Thanks, Nick. Well, we all thought that, just to clarify.
No, that's always good.
So the next question is, can you provide a worked example for a weekly paid employee straddling the month, please?
We will be providing some more examples. I can't now at this time. I've not done the preparation, but we will be providing some, and I'll make sure that there's a weekly one in there as well. But generally speaking, the weekly one, let me give an example. It would follow the same logic, because your claim period would be for 1 week. But you may be claiming for more than one week in. Let me do an example and I'll get it through, but there's not one ready for the time being.
That's fine, Nick. We can send that one out afterwards.
Yeah.
The next question, can an employee who is made redundant remain on furlough but have the employer top up to full pay?
If they've already been made redundant, no, because effectively they've left the business. If I understand the question right.
Okay, maybe that the person who asked that question could just double clarify that one. The next question, I have an employee who is going on maternity leave. She is already on furlough as we pay enhanced maternity pay. Can we keep her on furlough, and how much can we claim?
You can't keep her on furlough because statutory absence trumps furlough, so that she has to be put on statutory maternity pay, and depending whether you're a small employer, you can either recover 103% or 92% of the SMP costs as normal. The SMP that would be paid to her would be based upon her normal hours prior to furlough pay. So although she's been on furlough, the government don't want her to lose out on SMP. So hopefully that answers that question. SMP trumps furlough, so you wouldn't just keep them on furlough for when they go on maternity.
Great, thank you, Nick. The next question, I think we might have already answered this one, but I'll just ask it just in case. Can you reduce to say 3 days back for a couple of weeks and then back to full furlough?
You can, yes, you can. It would be treated as a flexible furlough with regards to the calculations for NIC and pension in the claim period. But yes, the idea is it's totally flexible. So yes, you could do.
Great, thank you, Nick. The next question, does the employee who is on any type of furloughed, flexible or full still need to earn 80% of gross pay?
The 80% of, when it says they still need to earn it, they will still earn that, because if they're on full furlough. If they're on flexible furlough, of course, they're going to be paid 100% of base pay for the hours that they work, and then a portion of the furlough up to the 80%, certainly in July and August. I think that answers the question.
Great, thank you. The next one, Nick. Does the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme grant get treated as T9 for VAT?
I am not a VA expert. I absolutely have no idea, I'm afraid.
That's okay. We can pass that one on to our VAT team and get them to come back to you.
Good.
Next question. Will there be an extended deadline to payroll changes without charge due to having to make last minute changes / not being able to plan for a whole month?
Entirely, I've got to give a truthful answer. It depends entirely how late the changes are going to be. I mean, as a bureau, we don't charge willy-nilly. We very rarely recharge, but we also have to do the job of payroll, and therefore the person who's asked the questions really should speak to their accounts or their payroll processor at the bureau to agree what's the latest they could get the data. I mean, from my preferred situation is that the client gets as long as possible in these times to make sure it's right first time, but just double checks with us to make sure that we've still got time to do what we need to do our end. Hopefully that answers it as clearly as I can.
Thanks, Nick. So back to the redundancy question. She has clarified regarding redundancy, I was referring to making someone redundant now and then remaining on furlough. So I presume, do they work their notice?
Oh, okay. Yes, okay, I understand now. So if you've made them redundant, can they be on furlough during a period of notice? My understanding is, of course, the answer is yes to that. The revenue has specifically said it cannot, the grant cannot cover redundancy pay. It made no mention to notice. Technically, and I should always put down the caveat that that technically is legal advice, and whoever asked it should really go to the legal representatives, because this is all new stuff. I'm sure there will be challenges, but my understanding from what I've read from the revenue is that they've only mentioned specifically redundancy, and therefore furlough would cover a period of notice because it's normal paying conditions.
Great, thank you, Nick. That is all of the questions we have had through for today. So feel free to close the webinar if you're happy, Nick, if you've got anything else to say.
No, I'm fine. What I would say is that if anyone does have any questions, and on some items it's a little vague because it's still coming out of government. If anyone's got questions, if they send them through to you like they did last time, and then we can maybe put together another Q&A document that we can get published on the website, maybe. Lizzie, that'd be okay?
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea.
Okay. Well, in that case, thank you all for attending. I hope you found it useful, and we'll bring the proceedings to an end. So, good morning. Thank you.